In my first 2 years of college, I failed 7 of my classes and really considered switching careers because of that, until I became a straight A student qualified enough to help teach upper division courses and academically competitive enough to apply to medical school. Hello everyone, my name is Frank, and on this channel we like to talk about different ways that we can optimize our lives for productivity, happiness, and financial independence. Now, in this video, I'm going to be showing you guys exactly how I went from flunking out of college courses to having some of the highest exam scores as a pre-med student. As a preface, I just want to say that this is not a life hack. Unfortunately, you do have to put the work into study, but what I can promise you is that if you follow the turtle method, you will become a significantly stronger and more confident student. So let's get started. The first lesson is actually why I call this the turtle method, and that's because I want you to take things slowly. This is a progressive process of becoming a better and stronger student, and I find that pre-meds in particular tend to do this a lot, but they tend to initially overload themselves with courses and on top of that add a bunch of activities to try to stand out from the competition when they potentially apply to medical school in the future. And yes, it's important to stand out from the competition if you're applying to some sort of graduate program, but not at the cost of your grades. And whatever major you are, if you're having some academic difficulties, I would strongly recommend to just try to scale things back a little bit if you can, because I think that's the one thing that made the biggest impact in my life. When I was really struggling, I decided to just not take as many classes, and because I wasn't taking as many classes, I had enough time to learn how to learn, and that has affected everything in my life to the point where today I am academically competitive enough to apply to medical school, which is something that I could have never dreamed of back then when I was just really struggling in college and failing my courses. As a side note, do realize that any class that you take and you drop or fail, you won't get a refund on, and you will have to retake. So that's a waste of money and a few more months of time on that same class. So realize that it's probably better to just backscale a lot, really learn how to study, rather than just keep the same volume of stuff and struggle along losing money and time. The next step is to understand your studying habits. And I don't think this is something a lot of people do, but I think it is something that's like ridiculously important to think about, so we have some sort of baseline understanding of where we're at currently and what we can do to improve on that. So I want you to literally write down what you do when you study. Really think about it and write down the specific strategies that you're currently using. So if all you're doing is reading the book before the test, write down, I read the book before the test. If you're using a bunch of flashcards, write down, I use flashcards. This is also important because I think it's very easy to blame a teacher for our bad grade in a course. But at the same time, I think like 99% of the time, it is not really the teacher's fault. The teacher's job is to expose us to the information. It is our job to understand that information. So I think once I accepted that, I became a lot more responsible in seeking out different ways for me to learn the material better, rather than focusing on how a particular teaching style wasn't necessarily working for me, which a lot of the time it doesn't. So I think that once we internalize this concept and really understand what we are currently doing to study, we can move on to the next step, which is to research different study methods. There's like a million different study strategies out there. You can find a bunch of them on YouTube, but what I want you to do is focus on understanding really the main difference between passive learning and active learning. Passive learning is something like reading a book. You're not actually doing anything, you're just sort of consuming the information. Active learning, on the other hand, is you actually interacting with the material, for example, using flashcards in a program like Anki or Quizlet to test yourself on the material, and that is a form of active learning. Once you understand that basic concept, there's a bunch of different types of passive learning and active learning strategies to use. I do recommend looking at your list and seeing if you are mainly using passive learning methods so far, or if how you're studying currently is more based on active learning strategies. Regardless, I want you to do a bunch of research into what other people are doing and how they're studying. There's great resources here on YouTube, there's great resources on Google in general, and there's great resources on Reddit. There's a bunch of stuff you can look into, and you can probably spend hours on this looking through different forums and things to see what is really working for other people, and you can go from there. Also, I want you to realize that different subjects might require a different study strategy. For example, if you have a math test coming up, how you study for that math test is going to be very different towards how you study for something like a history test. Once you do a bunch of research into different studying strategies, I want you to go to the next step, which is to try the ones that are most promising to you. So by this point, now you should have a very good idea of how exactly you're currently studying and how other people suggest that you study. So what you do now is experiment. I don't really suggest completely switching up your study strategy 100% to what someone else is doing, but rather slightly shifting and modifying your study strategy as you go along to test out different aspects. So for example, for every test, what I used to do, and still do by the way, is I'll try something slightly different and see if I learned the material faster, if I got a higher grade on the test, or if it was just a funner or more enjoyable way to learn. The way this worked for me is that I really like to write outlines, and that wasn't getting me the best exam scores. So I researched online and I found that flashcards were better. What I did was I went from writing outlines to writing physical flashcards. Kind of literally the same outline format, just in flashcards, makes it a more active learning experience, and that worked for me for a bit. But then for more intense topics, it was a bit tedious writing out my flashcards. So I switched from physical flashcards to Anki, which is like a very sophisticated flashcard program that uses like an algorithm and everything. And it's like a game changer. But I don't think I could have gone from outline to Anki straight off. I think the procedural steps of outline to physical flashcards to Anki really made me appreciate what Anki brought to the table. And so this is why I say you should slightly modify your formula as you go along, rather than taking such a drastic jump and then not being able to see something for what it is. From all of this experimentation, you will have to learn what works for you yourself. You can't expect someone else to tell you what the right way to study is. I don't think that's a very good strategy because, for example, I had one of my friends who kept getting A's in class, and all he did was he recorded the lectures and listened to the lectures as podcasts. Now, did I experiment with it? Yes. Did I completely change my study strategy to be that way? No. And I learned through experimentation that I wasn't very receptive to that style of learning, and that's completely fine. I much prefer Anki, which in my opinion is superior, but he disagrees and he doesn't like Anki and prefers studying with a podcast. The lesson here is that different people learn in different ways, and you shouldn't expect someone to be able to tell you exactly what the best way to learn is without doing some experimentation yourself. Last thing is that you just have to enjoy the process, and as with anything in life, the more you enjoy something, usually the better you get at it in the fastest amount of time. Personally, I never thought in my wildest dreams that I would be very interested in optimizing my study strategy so I can get a higher grade on the next test. But slowly, little by little, I began to really get into this, to the point where I have gotten some odd comments about it from some people, but you know what? The results speak for themselves, and I think that's the point. Like I said in the beginning of the video, I can't promise you that all of a sudden you're just gonna start pumping out A's like nobody's business. But I do promise you that if you stick to the turtle method, within maybe like 2 semesters, you will start to see significant changes in your academic career, and little by little, you will gain a high degree of self-efficacy, which just means that you'll be very confident in your study abilities, to the point where getting an A in a very difficult class like biochemistry is not going to seem all that difficult to you with the right mindset and strategies. If you guys like this video on becoming a better student and are generally interested in this theme of self-improvement, I do strongly recommend watching my video on lessons we can take away from 2020, which I'm gonna link somewhere over there, I think. And that's it for me. I hope you have a wonderful rest of the day. Make sure to click that like button if you can, and I will see you next time. Bye.